thank you for joining me again. The purpose of this clip is to examine relationships between people. Why am I doing it? Well, I think over the last 14 days we're looking at now, the changes in the way we're working, the effects of isolation, really will have tested relationships between people. And there are some pretty standard roles that we occupy. So what this is about is to take a look at those roles and relationships and maybe just ask ourselves, well, is there a way of shifting it so that we could all do it a little bit better? That's for now. One of the other things I'm very certain about is that when we return to something like normality, there are going to be some real changes in work patterns. There are some interesting ideas here that could and maybe should be transferred to the workplace that will enable us to think differently about how we do what we do. Thank you.
Okay then, so let's take a look, shall we? Like any journey, I suppose it's a good idea to know where we are before we start. And I'm going to suggest to you that we all of us, people we know, occupy one of these three roles: the rescuer, the victim, or the persecutor. Before we go too much further with this, it's probably a good idea to just find out the characteristics of that role and see how much it applies to us. And we can think of the situations we're in right now, where there's a lot of uncertainty around. We're having to do different things for reasons that we wouldn't have chosen. What roles are we occupying in those circumstances, and what does it actually mean? So let's take a look at what's underneath each one of them, shall we? Okay, so some typical characteristics of the rescuer. They want to be seen to be the hero, and not only seen to be the hero, they need to know themselves that they are the hero of the hour. They're the person who can solve it. They're the person who can do as the label says, rescue the situation. And to do this, they take responsibility for other people. You know, your problem is my problem. I'll help you with this. I can show you the way here. And in order for them to maintain that role, it's very important that they keep the victim in the same position. The victim remains dependent upon them. And if you think about it, if the victim is not dependent upon them, then they no longer have a rescuer role. So you might need to think about just how healthy that actually is, both for the victim, but also for the rescuer, because, you know, one of these days you're going to have to face it. You can't fix it all. Well, we've just talked about the relationship between the rescuer and the victim, so let's take a little look at the victim, shall we? Avoidant. They step aside from conflict. They're passive. They'll take a step back. They'll let things happen to them. They will seldom say what it is they mean or they want to say. The helpless position. There's nothing I can do. This sort of stuff always happens to me. Why is it always me? And in so doing, they beat themselves up at the same time. I am an unworthy person. And you know, again, you might want to think of how you would apply this to your current situation, maybe to a work situation, and to how things are when things are a little more normal. Who are the people you know who take on this victim role? Have you ever taken it on? And think about what it actually feels like. I mean, it seems to me that if we're doing this, it starts to make a bit of sense of relationships that we might be experiencing right now. You know, as I was putting this together and using the model, I thought, you know, nobody's going to be called a persecutor and get a good result out of this. So, accepting that, again, maybe just thinking of ourselves and others. When are we the persecutor? When are others the persecutors? When are we aggressive? When are we demanding? When do we blame? When is it that we appear superior? How many times are we critical than others? And in one or two conversations recently, I've delineated between being critical and giving critique. And for the purposes of the persecutor, the critical element of that is that you will never get it right. Giving critique is about, yeah, that bit was great, that bit worked really well, this bit we might need to take a look at. And I'm sure that you can just feel the difference between the two. But again, let's apply it to your general experience of the world, of the workplace, and also where we are now. What roles are people occupying? There's that classic quote, isn't there? You know, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. At some point, it feels right that when we take a look at ourselves and think, well, if this is who I am, what could I be? What shifts could I make? So we're going to change some names here, and the one we're going to look at first is a shift where the rescuer becomes a coach. So can you feel the difference here? That you're actually donating some capability to the person who you're alongside, and you're acknowledging the strengths that they've already got. Now, you know, we might need to sort of work a little bit and find out what those strengths are, but they will exist. And actively listens. Look at what's going on around here. I'm listening to you. I'm going to listen to your problem, but I'm not going to own it. So can you see the difference between that in the coach role and the rescuer role? And also important, you know, for your own well-being, if you feel that you're comfortable in this coach role, that's where you'd like to be, you simply have to set yourself some boundaries. Otherwise, it becomes never-ending and exhausting. And what we also do with our relationship with clients, you know, sometimes we say, is it okay if I raise this subject with you? But what's really useful is to give choices about when we have the conversation. So look, I can do 20 minutes now, or we can do this on Thursday and extend it a little bit. So really you can see the difference here is about taking ownership of it and developing the other person rather than becoming their rescuer. And it's changing the dependency of the relationship. This is empowering the person to whom you're reaching out. Okay, so how do we work with challenges? And again, think of the situations. Think of your work situation, the situation you might be in now. If you can think of somebody who you think, yeah, there's a lot of challenging behaviour going on there. I wonder what we can do to maybe keep the strength of that challenging behaviour, because we do need it, but to take the edges off it and to make it far more transformational, empowering, and ethically the right thing to do. So you can see with stating boundaries and active listening, they are very much on the similar to what we've seen on the coaching side of things. That shouldn't be a surprise, because coaching should be challenging. It's not a matter of agreeing. The clarity of expectation is really important here, because what are we doing? Whatever it is, we're setting some sort of boundary, we're setting a deadline, and we're not saying, you know, off you go and fail. We're saying quite clearly, if there's a problem at any point, let me know. Now, what you do when you find out what the problem is really situation dependent. What we're not doing is abandoning a person to get it wrong again and then criticising them for getting it wrong. What we're saying to that person is that, you know, I trust you to be getting on with this. If it is going wrong, let me know, and we can take it from there. We're providing them a choice, aren't we? We're doing the last one here, and it's if you can hold to that agreement, I can be involved with you. So we're shifting the emphasis away from criticism of the victim to giving some boundaries to the how and where our relationship works well. And I am going to challenge you here, but I'm going to do it in an ethically valid way, and in a way that doesn't reinforce all the negative beliefs that you may have about yourself. We're going to move on from there. I hope you'll agree that the expression victim has got some values and some feelings attached to it that are completely different to survivor. Survivor's got this kind of idea of growth and development about it. What I don't want to do, though, is to project an image that there's something unworthy about victims. People have become victim or adopted a victim role for a number of reasons. It could be about impairment. That's actually where they feel at their safest. Or it could literally be where they are at their safest. That it's only when they appear to be a victim to their aggressor that they'll actually be left alone. So, you know, the torment reduces. And that's really important. What this is about is trying to help people to move from the role, the victim role, to survivor role. And one of the things we can try to encourage people to do is tell me what you want, because without that I can neither coach you or challenge you, or have that blending of challenging and coaching going on. It's tough when people say they're going to do something and then they don't. But let's take a look at the relationships here. If we take a look at that element from challenging, if you say you're going to do something and you feel at some point that you can't, let me know and we'll see what we can do. We can take it from there. Another really important strategy approach we can use with people who sit into that victim category is to help them recognize the strengths, and there are a number of tools that we can use to do that. It feels very often that those who occupy the victim role have abandoned any real idea that they've got any strengths to offer at all. They can plod along from one day to the next with feelings of worthlessness that are reinforced sometimes by their persecutors or their rescuers. So can you see the relationship here, that the rescuer, persecutor, in many ways are as bad as each other. Their intentions might be different, but they keep the victim where they are. So when the rescuer becomes a coach and the persecutor becomes a challenger, they can help the victim to do some of these things and to recognize their strengths. It starts to feel better when we can help people to understand that largely we have no control over the events that happen to us. And you'll get yourself into a pretty difficult place if you believe that we have, because we just haven't. But what we can control is the way we respond to those events. And we can stop ourselves from responding from a completely supine place, this always happens to me, to a more empowered place of, I wouldn't have chosen this. Here's where I am and here's where I want to be. Here are the journey steps that I'm going to have to take to get there. Here's who can help me. Here's my commitment, and here's how I can help myself. So these are powerful conversations, powerful self-talk. However, they are, in my view, essential to moving relationships away from that initial triangle of rescuer, persecutor, victim to a much healthier one of coach, challenger and survivor. And I'm going to finish with this slide. The image here is about walking alongside somebody, and it's difficult these days given where we are with social isolation, real changes and shifts in our working and living patterns. None of this stops us making a phone call. None of this stops us reaching out using all the technology we've got available to us. We can have face-to-face conversations with people. We can send a text. We can invite them to have a conversation with us. The critical thing is that people understand that we're there. And there's an expression, I'm there for you. I'm not quite sure whether that might need to shift as I'm there with you so that I can be there for you. So whereas that is a very powerful image of two people in physical contact with each other, I like to think of it as people who could be in virtual contact with each other, or people who could be in emotional contact with each other. The important thing is not to let go of each other. Thanks for your time, and as ever, if you'd like to find out more, there are some contact details to follow. And to re-emphasise, we will never charge for this particular tranche of our work. Thanks.